welcome everyone. We might as well get started. I'm Bill Kaufman. I'm with Internet2 and InCommon, and thanks for joining. This session is Hosted Solutions, Federation Adapters, and Evaluating Cloud Solutions. And kicking things off is Deidre Chamberlain, who is the CEO of Cirrus Identity. So Deidre, I will hand it over to you.
Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We have a presentation today that it really started, I think it was like 3 TechX's ago in a room in Orlando where a bunch of people were saying, hey, we need to take a look at identity providers as a service. And that spawned an InCommon work group that Mary's going to speak about briefly as one of the co-chairs. And then a couple of vendor partners, InCommon Catalyst, you'll be hearing more about the Catalyst program later, have developed solutions to help fill the space where it comes to identity providers as a service. And so we wanted to start though, just with a quick poll, and I think Bill's going to be driving those. So Bill, if you could call up the first poll, we want to just get a little sense of what brought you to this session, kind of where you are in your thinking about this. And so I'll go ahead and let Bill call up the first poll. You're on mute, Bill.
Can you see the poll okay?
I don't see it, but you can. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. It's filling up rapidly. Can you see now that you're not sharing, Deidre?
Yes, I can see it. And the responses are starting to slow. Are you going to close the poll or do you want me to do that?
I can do that.
Okay, cool.
Looks like we're still getting 1 or 2 stragglers in. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Yes.
So a lot of curious folks. That's great. 31% of people undergoing an IAM quote unquote modernization effort. We use that word somewhat tongue in cheek because I know a lot of the commercial vendors use this word modern to say use our product, which is definitely not our goal here. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And then we have one more poll question that we want to ask next. And we'll just, Bill, if you could just fire up the second poll question.
This will be an interesting one.
This is an answer all that apply.
I feel like it's almost a duck race.
Indeed.
And Shibboleth wins. Great information.
Felt bad. I had to check way too many boxes there.
Who is that?
We're
We'll
about
have to
done.
talk and help you out.
Yeah, no, we're on a good path. It's just getting there.
Excellent.
I suppose one question, I see that 59% said Azure AD. And I wish I would have thought to ask if you would have answered the same a year ago. It seems like definitely I see a big trend towards people migrating to Azure AD. Awesome. Well, thanks. So this is helpful for us as the presenters. I hope it's interesting information for you all who are on the call. I think with that, we'll go ahead and go into our presentation. We wanted to start, we asked Mary if she would be willing to come as one of the co-chairs of the Identity Providers as a Service work group that the InCommon Technical Advisory Committee chartered. If she would come and talk a bit about what were the impetus to form the group and some of the initial or some of the final results that came out that will be a frame for this presentation. So I'm going to go back to showing my screen, but I will go ahead and drive the slides, Mary. Oops. 1 second here. Sorry, let me get back where I was before. I was doing a bunch of work on the IAM Her group last night, trying to get some information out to people, and that's where I was. Sorry, those are all messed up. Mary, if you just want to go ahead and start talking about the group, I will get back to where I was.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, thanks, Deidre. I am Mary Mckee. I work at Duke University in identity management and IT security. And as Deidre said, I was one of the co-chairs for the InCommon Chartered Identity Providers Service Working Group, along with EJ Monty from Duquesne University, who is the other co-chair of that group. So as we're, kind of pulling up slides, for some background, I think it's obvious. We all know that a lot of our community is moving IT infrastructure partially or fully to the cloud. And that's kind of a nod to interest in strategic outsourcing of IAM infrastructure. So if we're trying to keep federation accessible to all of our community, we need to obviously take that into account. So it was in this kind of spirit that the InCommon Technical Advisory Committee chartered this Identity Providers Service Working Group. And I volunteered not so much because Duke was in the market for this kind of thing, but because we had been experiencing some collaboration challenges with institutions moving IAM infrastructure to hosted solutions, and in the process, losing some federation capability. So I initially joined the group thinking that it would really only benefit Duke insofar as it helped InCommon, and we're big users of InCommon, so that benefits us. But actually, this conversation has had a much more immediate benefit to us, which I might have a chance to say about a little bit in a bit. So I think we're looking for, Deidre, the key recommendations on the working group report.
Yes, I am back.
Excellent.
And key recommendations.
Great. So within the working group, we started with a survey to try to get a sense for what people were looking for out of this kind of solution. And after unpacking the results of that survey, the most immediate thing that hit us over the head was that people are thinking of very, very different things when we talk about cloud-based identity providers. The good news was that we were able to kind of coerce all of the answers into 4 key architectural models. The first one, which was not the majority by any stretch, but there were some people who were thinking not so much of identity provider as a service, but really identity and access management as a service. We decided that was beyond the scope of our working group, but we always like to mention it because we want to make sure that people know, like, what specifically are you trying to accomplish here? If you're just looking to get a managed identity provider in the federation, this is not what we're talking about. But when we go to the things that were in scope for the working group, some people wanted like a pretty heavy solution that would handle intercampus SSO, federated SSO, and host and manage all institutional and electronic credentials. There was another option that came out where people said, well, we already have a credential store. We don't really want to move it. We're happy with our solution, or we're tied to our solution, but we would like to move just the identity provider piece for campus and federated SSO and have that tie into our existing credential store. And then there was a really lightweight option that came up a lot, which was what we call the federation adapter option. And that is something that allows you to keep your infrastructure exactly as it is today, but tie your not so federation ready SSO infrastructure into an IDP in the federation. So our final recommendations were centered around making sure that we could help people understand, first of all, which of those things are you looking to do? How much are you trying to outsource? How much are you trying to retain exactly as it is today, so that you can pick a product that works well for you and is going to meet your needs? And then to try to have InCommon be a little bit more visible in terms of guidance about what of these solutions within these different architectural models are going to qualify as federation ready in terms of our standards. We don't want to put the burden on institutions who are trying to be responsible for less by saying you also need to be an expert in federation in order to make a good product decision. So that's a place that InCommon and this community can really help by saying, these are the standards, we've validated that these products meet these standards, and you hook this up and you're going to be good to go, and it's going to take care of everything that we need from our side. So we were most interested in the working group in the federation adapter model because from our perspective, it is the obvious low-hanging fruit. For many institutions out there who couldn't afford to design their IAM program around federation capability, but really wish that they had it, this is a really straightforward, low overhead, extremely doable way to have it all. So I think if we go to the next slide, we should probably step back and talk a little bit about the end game and why all of this matters. And next slide. Thanks, Deidre. So one thing that comes up a lot in my job at Duke, and maybe yours, is how overloaded the term federation is to begin with. So there's all sorts of solution providers out there that boast federation capability as defined by interoperability between their suite of products. But we're really talking about capital F federation, which is something much bigger and about trust and community. We are talking about ditching the guest accounts, letting collaborators use their institutional credentials to access research environments that we host and other resources. We're talking about being able to defend that decision to chief information security officers and cyber insurance underwriters, that by outsourcing that, we actually are not losing anything in the process because we all adhere to common security standards. So this is very different. When we talk about federation, we really need to make sure that we're all working with the same definition of federation, that federation is not just about interoperability, although that's a big part of it. It's also about managing trust. So we do that obviously through InCommon and through InCommon, through GÉANT, to confer access to services that really need that higher level of scrutiny. That's not just about getting access, but sometimes we're giving access to really high value assets, and we want to make sure that we are having people adhere to community standards and we're not losing any security in the process. So I mentioned earlier that I joined this working group knowing that Duke is really unlikely to ever use a managed identity provider solution. We are one of those schools, as I think a lot of you know, that can never leave well enough alone, and we live to tinker. But a lot of our stubbornness on that point is about feeling that we can trust solution providers and that they understand that capital F federation. And as a result of this conversation about cloud-based IDPs, we actually have started using some of the offerings from solution providers who are very invested in this community, like Cirrus and Unicon. And I think we're stepping up our federation game because of it. So I'm going to hand it back to Deidre to introduce some federation adapter products. But I hope that as a result of this session, we'll all be better community partners in just having another tool in our tool belt, not just for our own institutions, but for other institutions we're trying to interoperate with. Because a lot of times we see that federation capability ends up being something that we don't think about until it's too late. And these adapters are an opportunity to kind of pull things back in, shore them up, and not leave that opportunity for collaboration on the table. Thanks, Deidre.
Thank you so much, Mary. Really appreciate you joining us today. And so, yes, so we're going to move on now to another poll question before we start talking about a couple of these vendor solutions for federation adapters. So Bill, if you could call up this one. Again, I think I have to. God, I don't want to go through I'm going to let you guys look at the poll. I'm not going to stop sharing and get caught in my other window.
Yeah, it's happening.
Excellent.
Still a lot of movement.
Excellent.
Looks like hybrid's in the lead.
One probably could have used a 0 to 100% on-prem.
Of course, hybrid, hybrid could be using a commercial cloud and your own on-prem, or moving your own stuff to the cloud. So there's lots of different hybrid options.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Are we done with our polling?
Yeah,
Looks like
we're
we're
done.
done. Yep.
Anything interesting?
A hybrid in the lead at 57%, and then on-prem 37. Fully hosted, we're at about 7%.
All right. Well, so when it comes to identity provider as a service, some kind of hosted solution, the focus for today's talk really is on these federation adapters, as Mary described, one of the recommendations that came out of the report. There's a lot of situations where universities are migrating to what I see is often commercial solutions like a Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Some campuses moving to Okta. I don't think so much in this audience based on what we saw earlier, but there are a lot of commercial solutions out there that support bilateral federation, but not multilateral federation. And that's where these adapters come in. So I'm going to just describe Cirrus's adapter. I'm going to not say that much because most of what Cirrus wants to do is a live demo that Mark is going to do for us. And then Charisse is going to talk about Unicon's federation adapter. So I'm going to start off just with super high level architecture. The Cirrus bridge can integrate with lots of different identity providers. Microsoft Azure Active Directory, Okta, G Suite. The first bridge we ever rolled out in production was our own bridge because Cirrus is a G Suite company. And so we run our own bridge so that we can register our IDP in the InCommon Federation metadata. And we also can connect to LDAP. So the Cirrus bridge, the SAML bridge, will help bridge the gap between those identity providers and multilateral federations like InCommon. So most of our customers say if they're migrating to Azure AD, will integrate most of their SAML apps directly with Azure AD or Okta, and they'll use our bridge for the federated apps that require InCommon participation on the part of the SP. Our bridge also supports CAS. So if you're a campus that is migrating to Azure AD, but you still have a bunch of applications running CAS for authentication, and there's no way they're ever going to move to SAML, we can fill that gap for you. I'm not going to cover this slide because that's going to be part of our demo, but you can find the Cirrus bridge in both the Azure AD and Okta portals, integration networks. We're super excited that over the summer, our bridge was finally added to the Azure AD application gallery. So you'll see that in a minute. And because, as Mary said, we are a vendor who's very much part of this community, we make it a point to make sure that our bridge supports some of the standard specifications that are important for research collaboration in higher education. So multilateral federation, consuming metadata from InCommon. We have some tools to streamline if you're moving from, say, a Shibboleth IDP to our bridge, try to make that really easy so you don't have to readjust your InCommon registration. We could do a lot of attribute mapping to support edu-person attributes that are not necessarily asserted by Azure AD or Okta. We support the RNS attribute category and the REFEDS MFA profile. So with our bridge, you're getting really close to NIH ready. And one of the things that we're super excited about as well is that coming soon, we're going to be supporting conditional access in Azure Active Directory in both Okta and Azure AD. So right now, our bridge is just another SP that sits in the Azure AD configuration or the Okta configuration. So any MFA policies, attribute policies apply to our bridge and hence to all the applications in the InCommon metadata protected by our bridge. But there may be times when you want to pull one of those apps out and require MFA for one of those apps or a certain attribute release policy for one of those apps. And you'll be able to do that soon with our conditional access support. This slide just describes the DNS add-on we have for streamlining your migration from your existing IDP. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into that detail. I want to turn it over to Mark so he can actually show you a little snippet of how it works. So I'll stop sharing now, Mark.
Good morning, folks. While I start screen sharing, I am Mark Rankin. I'm the Director of Product and Customer Success for those that don't know me here at Cirrus Identity. What we are going to show you is the experience for a Microsoft Azure Active Directory administrator on the campus integrating with our bridge and how it reflects itself for the end user. Very similar behavior if you're an Okta customer or a G Suite customer. Really, it's just the user experience for the integration in the administrative console. So here we are in the Azure administrative portal. I am logged into our Athena Institute, which is our sandbox demonstration Azure tenant. And if I wanted to add the Cirrus Bridge, I would go here to Enterprise Apps like you would do for any other application. And you would add a new app. And then you would search for Cirrus, for example. And here is our bridge. As Deidre excited that this summer we were added into the Azure gallery. You will see when you first go in, it's kind of the standard wizard. There is a step-by-step tutorial that we encourage customers. The first part of that is actually going to Cirrus Identity and starting a conversation with us about the registration. And there is a registration page here that will engage with Cirrus sales team in terms of requesting your own Cirrus Bridge. At the further down on the tutorial is conversation or discussion about the steps for integrating. And then after you have a conversation and you have a subscription in place with Cirrus Identity, we will give you a couple of parameters, basically the entity ID and the reply URL, which you will use in your bridge configuration. I'm going to actually switch to a pre-configured bridge just for the rest of the demo. So this is a bridge. This is the one that we actually have registered in the InCommon metadata. It is our Athena Institute tenant. As I said, we will give you some parameters to finish the configuration. You see those here. You also have the ability to set up discrete user attributes and claims. Deidre said we are working on an enhancement for conditional access, which will be a per downstream service provider configuration. Right now, if you configure the attributes, it has to be the collective set for anything that you want to integrate with InCommon. But all the other controls in Azure are there. You can provide access controls for the application. You can implement conditional access, such as an MFA policy, which we have applied to our bridge in InCommon, and any number of other controls. So that is the configuration side of it. I'm going to flip over to another window. On the end user side of it, the bridge is really a transparent experience for end users. Here we have EDUCAUSE, which, as many of you know, integrates with a lot of providers. One of our bridge customers is the University of Rhode Island. And you see, when I select that from the identity provider, it takes it directly to the very familiar Azure login experience. If I go back and bring up the Athena Institute, which is our test IDP, you will see that I was already logged into the Azure portal, but now because of the conditional access that is on the bridge, it is asking for my multi-factor authentication, which I will quickly pull up. And of course, it is locked. There, so on my phone, I just authorized the access, and now you are seeing that I negotiated with EDUCAUSE, and I am now logged in as my Athena Institute end user, which shows up as a QA admin. Same experience for NIH. Here is the NIH compliance check tool, which many folks have seen. If I look for the Athena Institute here, you will see that we'll negotiate the authentication. It will report that multi-factor is enabled. We actually have the assurance profile set up, so it is reporting my assurance profile and then the necessary attributes that are required by NIH. This is also reflected in, certainly NIH services such as PubMed or the ERA app So if I log into PubMed and go for more there and look for Athena again, I see that it's negotiating. And you see that I'm logged in as Mark, so a true single sign-on experience. I can go to my dashboard here, and you see that I have a favorite article in PubMed. So from the end user perspective, the experience is very transparent. It is very single sign-on. It is bringing Azure into, or Okta or Google G Suite into a multilateral federation, and it really extending the single sign-on experience that folks will have with these tools on campus into the multilateral experience. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to Clarice. Are we going to you, or
It's back to me just for a second here, just a real quick switch back to me. Let me get back into presenting mode. And so hopefully that gives you a really good flavor of how the Cirrus Bridge works. I just want to point out that one of our biggest motivations for developing this product and working on it over time to make it fit within the higher ed community is to speed people's access to federation. So we know that there's a lot of small to medium-sized schools out there that don't join InCommon, that don't have IDPs registered. And we want to just make that as easy as possible. So we do have a kind of a honed implementation process. It only takes 2 to 4 weeks or so to get things set up for you. And there's some documentation there. So anyone who's interested, you know where to find me. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Charisse.
Thank you, Deidre. All right, let me share. And I can move everybody out of the way here. All right. And present. All right, hello everyone. I am Charisse Arrowwood. I am the Senior Director of Identity for Unicon. Unicon's been involved with Internet 2 and InCommon for what I think 12 plus years now. It's been really exciting to be part of the community, to come to these conferences and really just interact and overall collaborate on all topics. Identity. For me, the past 5.5 years out of my 17 at Unicon have been focused distinctly on identity. And it's really brought insight to me about how foundational this topic is. And in higher education, all the great stuff that we want the users and our staff and students to do, they can't until we get really this foundation in place. So with me here today, I'm going to ask to do a quick introduction, is Mike Grady, who is one of our senior identity architects. Mike?
Hi, Mike Grady. I'm, as Charisse just mentioned, identity architect with Unicon. I work with the design and operation of several of the solutions that Charisse is going to talk about. Long history with Internet 2 and InCommon, and in higher education, many years at the University of Illinois prior to working for Unicon.
Thank you, Mike. All right, before I go into discussions about the actual 2 hosted offerings that we're going to talk about today, I wanted to just step back a minute first and thank Mary again, because the foundation of our presentation and having Mary discuss what the community discussions were about and what the needs really are out there in higher education, it presented or laid that foundation that we need, because really what it's about is you understanding what your needs are. We're presenting some options, but as we go through these options, think about what you're looking for as far as your future goals, or what your pain points are today and how those can be resolved with these solutions. There's a variety of them out there. And yes, we have some more fun polls for you to help us gather information and pinpoint that information. But it's really you understanding these are all great offerings out there, but what's going to be a good fit for me? So as we're going through those, think about that. And then I will try to move through this quickly so that we can get to some questions as well. And with that said, we actually are going to do a quick poll. So Bill, if you can help me with that, that would be awesome. So what is your anticipated IAM model in the next 2 to 3 years? We're looking at the future here, as now we've kind of trended from where are you? And what do you think about looking into the future at this point in time?
Is this the question that you were looking for, Charisse?
Yes. Oh, wait. Yes. Model no, not exactly. What is the primary? No,
That's
it's
not what it-
this is the one that we have at the end, but that's okay. You've got two of them over there.
This
They
is not
had
the one that
4 of them
popped
in
up.
here, so this was the 4th one.
Okay. All right. Well, that's fine. We really appreciate your participation in here to give us some insight as to where you are and where you're going. All right, looks like we're at a standstill. We'll go ahead and close that out. Thank you, Bill. So it looks like cost is the top right now, and then we're neck and neck with security and staffing based on a primary driving factor for your shift into the cloud. So that all makes sense. We appreciate, again, your time. All right. Let's go ahead and move on. As I mentioned with Unicon, currently we have 2 hosted offerings in the identity space with actually several others underway. So let's just focus on what we've got today. So the first one is what we call our IDP in the cloud. So this is a full SSO service providing all SAML and CAS services, federation, and easy access to the applications that they need. So our service is very, very straightforward, where we actually assist with current migration and configuration of your current SPs, as well as any MFA policies that you have in place, and or we can consult on that so that if you don't have anything set up in that area, we can actually take care of that during this process. A little bit about the infrastructure, which we'll go into a minute, but we do have multiple redundant instances with auto scaling as needed, and there is a full redundancy offer that we provide. So this again is your IDP in the cloud, right? So what we have here is very simplistic, very straightforward, because that's all that's really needed at this point. So we deploy actually just two instances in one region in separate zones using load balancing, and then set up to auto scale as needed to ensure that there's no interruptions in service at any point in time. The benefit of this solution overall is the obvious one, 24/7, 365, Unicon is ensuring that this environment is up and running so that your users can log in and get to the services that they need without issue. So let's talk about the implementation. Unicon's very collaborative in everything we do. So the first thing we do is meet up with you. We discuss what this engagement is about. It can be a very short, sweet, and concise engagement from start to end, depending upon availability of you, the clients, as well as the Unicon team, and marrying up so that timing is not an issue. So we have a checklist that is already templated out. That helps provide this process really some structure. So there's very clear understanding and expectations of what's needed from you as the client up front. Once that information is populated, and then as of course we help you with that, we do a review to make sure we're all clear on next steps. Unicon actually deploys the infrastructure, updates the configuration if we're migrating your SPs, MFA, et cetera, and then we hand it over for validation. Our average is to get this up and running within a 2-month period of time. Could be a little less, could be a little more. It really depends on your needs as far as providing information, your availability to do the verification, and then we roll together when you're ready to go to production. Now let's talk about after you're in production. So what about those future needs? I've got additional SAML SPs, I've got additional CAS services that I need to get integrated so my users can get to the tools and resources that they need. We can help you with that in a very easy fashion. Unicon has a support portal that we will provide you access to. When the need arises, you create a ticket with the appropriate information, and Unicon takes it from there. We'll set up the configuration, we'll let you know when it's available for verification, and then all we need is your okay that we're good to go, and then we agree upon that date and update your production environment. All right, this next piece here is about the Federation Gateway. So you've heard a lot about the value of the gateway and in general, just because Federation is a hot topic, and there are a lot of people out there using IDPs that are not federated capable, if you will, right? So if your IDP is not part of the Federation, we want to make sure that there's accessibility, and that's what this Federation Gateway provides. So if you're using Microsoft Azure, Google, Okta, OneLogin, whatever it might be, this will help to fill that gap. So this is a hosted solution that provides you with the management to make updates as needed. Unicon's going to handle that backend 24/7, 365 to make sure that the environment stays up and that you can get to the federation of your choice, InCommon, CAF, GÉANT, etc. So as we move on, you've seen this similar screen. We are partners with Okta, and we are listed as one of the preferred providers for to fill this federation gap. We actually are currently working with Microsoft, so way to go, Cirrus. We are working with them and hope to also be a part of their recommended vendor list, and we'll keep you posted on that. All right, so here is our high level infrastructure. So we're talking about any of the identity providers that have yet to provide the services through federation. So what do? Is we set up multiple instances in a region in different zones, load balance, and of course, again, the auto scaling to ensure that all of your users and your environment stays up across the board without issues. The end result goal is to get to the federation and to those services that you need. Now, the added bonus that we've identified and created for you is the client administrative interface. So this is a very step-by-step process that we work, which is different from our other service, because here we actually give you the time that you need to step through this path and to configure the needs that you have around federation. So we're going to walk through a little bit of that. We have a kickoff call, again, set expectations. Basically, it's a UI guided tour where you're going to set up your IDP, you're going to set up your federation, and you're good to go. Now, one of the key things that I want to mention is Unicon is very aware that everybody doesn't totally understand federation, or even if they haven't been able to access that, how do you make that happen? What is the federation manager at InCommon, and how does that work? So we provide consulting services and recommendations on how they can go about moving forward with that, and then come back to our federation gateway and get things set up. So again, it's very, very collaborative. We want to make sure there's no issues, no concerns, and that everything is very clear for us to be able to help you fill that federation gap. All right, this is what you're going to see. So what happens is, as a client says, you know what, we're really interested in this federation gateway, we meet, we have what we call, the initial kickoff, set those expectations, and then Unicon go ahead and builds out the service. When that happens, communication goes directly to the client in the form of a URL that brings them to this management dashboard. The first page of the management dashboards asks them to go ahead and populate that IDP. After that's completed and saved, you're actually brought up to a secondary page, which looks similar to the IDP, which is your federation information. That's where you're going to populate that information. Again, already being prepared and have gone through that process. Once you hit save, you'll get the message here, and you're actually ready to go. This is a very short-term, streamlined, can actually be done within a week or less, assuming the client and Unicon have availability, and we're set up with the IDP and the federation information. Now, within this self-service dashboard, you also have the ability to change your attributes. So by default, we're releasing all attributes, but you can go in and change the attribute release policy based on your needs as they occur. These other fields are actually informational, so you can always go back and look at your IDP information or the federation gateway and general information as well as anything that you input. So again, pretty straightforward, brings you, the UI walks you through it in a very streamlined way to make sure that federation gap is no longer an issue, and then your users can get to those resources and tools that they need to ensure success. All right, and we don't have another poll because it looks like I missed that one, so apologies on that. That is all we have for today, so hopefully within the time. I tried to speed through it there. We'd love some questions. Anything we can answer for you?
If I may, I'll voice one. One of the things that nobody has really talked about is how do you secure our data in your environment?
I'll start. I guess I'll take part of that question. Of course, we take security very, very seriously. One thing I'll start by mentioning is that we store, with this particular solution, very little data. We serve primarily as a broker, so we're passing authentication attributes from Azure AD to the target SP and not persisting much of that data at all. In terms of security, we have a very elaborate security program. We've responded to the HECFAT, so we have a full list of all of our security controls that we will happily share with people who are interested in our solution. Mark, did you want to add anything as our security point of contact?
No, I always will add something. As Deidre said, we persist almost no data. The only data that we persist for a given customer is incidental log information, just for diagnostic purposes. And our security program includes the HECVAT. We also do external vulnerability testing and other functions as well. So we're certainly willing to have a conversation with you if you have security questions and concerns.
And the answers for Unicon would be similar. We have a security team. We have various security certifications, and similarly, even with the full IDP in the cloud solution, we're still connecting back to campus credential store. So we, again, really the only information that persists with that solution would be logs, which are protected, and with the gateway, there'd be even less.
Looks like we have a couple folks that raised their hand.
Yeah, then I'll go ahead. I was wondering for Cirrus, you're in the App Store of Microsoft. You're represented as basically as one service provider within but can you differentiate? You mentioned something like, can you also differentiate Conditional for the SPs behind your bridge?
That is capability that we have developed. It's basically in beta release now. We're just looking for the first customers who like to use it. And yes, it will use the Microsoft APIs to identify the application within the Microsoft Azure AD framework that's going to be from the EduGAIN or InCommon metadata. We consume all of EduGAIN metadata, but you'll be able to essentially set up a bilateral configuration for a specific application that sits behind the bridge to require MFA, to set specific attribute release requirements for that app, and still have the benefits of the multilateral federation. So the answer is yes. You'll be able to set up SP specific configuration within the Azure AD portal using Microsoft's built-in conditional access tooling to specify requirements for a given SP that's in the federation metadata.
Okay, thank you. Interesting.
I had a question about logging for both of the vendors in terms of kind of what level of logging is available. Is it primarily through your federation adapters, or is it is that something that will show up in some way on the source IDP, whether it be Azure or Okta or whatever? And then also do you have mechanisms for getting that data into an SEIM like Splunk?
Mark, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, Christopher, for the first part of it, we are not back populating logging information to the source identity provider. So the logging would be only things traversing the bridge. At present, that information is in Cirrus Identity and accessible with customers through support tickets. We are working on and have on our long-term roadmap SIM integration and other self-service functionality as well, things like querying and those kinds of things. Probably depending on customer desires and requests, that's something in the 6-month to 18-month time frame. But that is stuff we have. Those are capabilities we have thought about and do have long-term plans for.
And for the ID, for the Unicon fully hosted IDP, we use secure syslog. If institutions want to bring the logs into their own SCIM, we don't currently have an SCIM hosted solution on our side for the institution, because, again, IDP would only be part of an institutional's, the set of logs an institution would want to bring into their their logging analysis. So we will provide the logs that way, or if the client isn't taking advantage of that and needs a copy of the logs, we have a way to transfer them to the client.
Well, thanks, Mary, for setting the stage, and thank you, Sharice and Deidre and Mike and Mark, for that great overview of these solutions to get people using Federation. Well, hey, folks, I'm Bill Kaufman. I'm going to just be your host and try to fill in where necessary. I'm from Internet 2 and InCommon, and welcome to presentation from the National Institutes of Health on how they're changing access through adding multi-factor authentication. Today we have with us, and these are all from the National Institutes of Health, Jeff Erickson, who is Chief of Identity, Credential and Access Management Services, Sandeep Sathya Prasad, I hope I got that right, Project Delivery Manager, and also Sumit Nanda, a technical lead working on identity and access management. Jeff, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Bill. So first, let me just make sure that you're seeing my slide. It should be the title slide, October 5th, 2021, Updated Identity Management Requirements.
We are.
Excellent. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us, and thanks for the introduction. So for some of you may remember last year, we presented, I think, and announced what I'll be talking about here in a little bit, giving you an update about the first phase of some changes that we're making. And so today I'll be giving an update on that and talking about the progress we've made and what comes next. So if I can drive this. There we go. So the agenda, first I'll start with why are we doing this, and then talk a little bit about what we've done and here in phase one. And we have a recorded demo of how of the user experience. And then I think the most time will be spent today talking about phase two, which is what's started now and will be running through the end of 2022. And all of that is in support of researcher access. And then we'll talk about some of the different things that we're honoring here with respect to different REFEDS standards. Specifically, the one that will be the focus of phase two is the REFED of assurance framework, some recommended next steps. And then we've got a slide at the end that has a whole bunch of hyperlinks in it for access to additional data sources or information sources. And this needn't take the full 40 minutes. I'm anticipating that it won't. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions that you might have along the way, or at the end rather. So in case you don't know, the National Institutes of Health is a federal agency within the Department of Health and Human Services, and our mission is to perform medical research, to train future researchers, and I won't read our mission statement, but there it is. What we've been focusing on with my team, and I will put in a plug that we could not have done anything that we've pulled off without help from the InCommon team, Anne and Tom and Albert, among many others, as well as folks from research institutions around the country who have used the compliance check tool that we built as well as another group here at the NIH who run the electronic research administration system that manages all of our grants. It truly was a collaborative effort. The main focus has been around making sure that when people are logging into NIH systems, that we get a standard set of basic information about people who are logging in, that people do multi-factor authentication when they log in, and that we have some indication about the assurance that the identity provider has, the research institution has, about who that person is. So separating out 2 and 3 is 2 being how did they log in, the multi-factor piece, and number 3 is about who is actually logging in. So those were our 3 main things that we were focused on: the basic information, the MFA, and the identity assurance. So as I said, over the course of the past year, since last November, and what we just turned on September 15th, a couple weeks ago, was a process where we send a signal to the IDP that the user selects. The IDP needs to be able to interpret the signal that we send them, and then prepare the package that we need to send us the response. That package including that basic set of information that I mentioned, as well as the IDP performing MFA on our behalf. If all of that happens and they've constructed the response, the assertions according to the standard format that we've adopted, then they can have access in the September 15th timeframe was to the ERA system that we have here. There is, as noted there at the bottom, there is a backdoor that in the event that an institution doesn't yet support this capability, that's okay. We certainly don't want to disenfranchise anybody, and researchers can still log into ERA using their ERA credentials that they have, which is a local username and password. Or they can log in using a credential that they get from the General Services Administration login.gov service. I don't remember if I put it on this slide. One thing to know is that ERA is moving to require multi-factor authentication for all of their users over time. They did push out the date. I'm not exactly sure what the new date is, but they are moving in that direction. So over time, that option for the ERA username and password will likely be deprecated, in which case, if people aren't using this federated multi-factor mechanism that we just turned on, then their only other option is going to be to go to login.gov. And that goes back to another reason why we undertook this project with everyone, is that it just seemed like people have, to the extent that all of you, the IDPs around the world, you know who your staff are, you run these services, you already presumably do some level of MFA. If we can leverage that, then that's win-win for everybody. It's good for us because we don't need to send somebody to another credential provider to get yet another credential. It's good for us from the standpoint that the MFA, the credentials that they manage and use every day for accessing your systems, they're able to use to get to NIH systems. And it's fundamentally, it's good for the researcher who then, again, doesn't have to manage multiple credentials. They can use the credential and the MFA that they use every day to access NIH resources. So the way that this thing works, and I've got a description here, and then I'm gonna just play a video that shows this. So it starts with one of your researchers, or our researchers, our shared researchers, logging into the ERA system. We in the demo that you're going to see, we're using University of Wisconsin. That person selects their organization from the list of institutions. Behind the scenes, we send a signal out to that IDP. That IDP performs the MFA, packages up the assertions that they send back to us that includes that basic set of information that I described, the MFA assertion and some assertion of identity assurance, and they're in. So that's the process that, let's see if I can make this video work. Click here. So this, by the way, is in the ERA development environment. So in the URL, you see the stage reference. This isn't the production instance of ERA, but you'll see the selection of University of Wisconsin-Madison there in the where are you from list, the redirect out to Wisconsin, log in now somewhere on a pre-registered device that has Duo on it. He does the push notification. Wisconsin packages up the assertion, sends it back to us, and the next screen is he's in to ERA. That's it. So when it works well, that's the process. That just got turned on September. It did it over the night on the 15th, but people started using it starting on the 16th. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get any data prior to this about how many times it's been used. One data point that I do have is that on the way into the turning this on, before we turned it on, ERA in their drop-down list, they used to manually maintain that drop-down list because they didn't allow federated access for just any institution. There was a whole process that IDPs had to go through. And there were, I think the number was about 96 research institutions who had gone through that process. The ERA tells me that it actually wasn't used very much. Most people would log in using their ERA credentials instead of that federated option. But there were 96 institutions in the list. Now that once we turned this on, it's a list of about, 3,000, 3,200, something like that. It really is the entire InCommon federation and the interfederation partners that we've got. Of course, not all of those are compliant with the ability to receive the signal that we're sending. So we don't govern the list as a function of these are the ones that will do the multi-factor authentication that we need. We just display the full list. In the event that somebody selected an institution that doesn't yet support this, then we throw an error that says that displays here's who to contact at your IDP if you selected. I think UCLA actually does support this, but I'm going to pick on them because I saw those initials a minute ago. If they selected UCLA and UCLA did not support this this standard, then they would see an error message saying you can contact so-and-so at UCLA. Because it could be too that UCLA does support the signaling standard, but that individual isn't enabled for MFA at UCLA. That's another error use case. And we also display the message that if you want, you can still come, if you're in a hurry or if you want, you can still come back and log into ERA with your ERA username and password that you'd used previously. So that was it for phase one. That just got turned on. So with the enablement or the rollout of phase one, we have turned our attention to phase two. And I will give a shout out and props to Brett Bieber. We stole his slides that he had presented a couple, thank you, a couple months ago, where he had presented this message, which talks about some of what institutions will need to do over the coming year in order to align with what we're trying to do with respect to identity assurance. And fundamentally, it comes down to linking processes that an institution is already following to your IDP that we, the NIH service provider, are interfacing with. So that place that we're sending our signal and that is responding, doing the MFA and responding to us as often as not, as many of you probably know, that IDP may not know and may not be connected to other processes. So for example, you've got staff or students who might be working in a research lab who come to the university and go through some sort of in-person or remote ID proofing process. And depending on which one they did, they might, whether they were present and showed their I-9 documents or they did it in some remote fashion, ultimately it's tying that government issued ID that the person has to show their identity to some onboarding process. So that somehow needs to be tied in with other sources that exist at the university in the event of, it could be your HR database that has other name information. You could be tying against the doing the verify lookup. Perhaps you've got a connection out to a system that actually validates the information that's on an I-9 document. Tying that into other IAM systems that you're running on your way to the systems that we're actually going to interface with, so that in the end, when we send our signal, you actually are able, you have information that fundamentally in the future we'll be looking for that represents the strength of the assurance, identity assurance that you have of that person who's logging in. So the MFA that's like now table stakes. This next part is the piece where we want to make sure that you know with some higher level of assurance that who the person is. In other words, it's linking that account create request in your directory and the linkage to MFA that you do back to some process that already exists at the institution. So this is another version of a spectrum slide that Brett had prepared that shows that there is not one way to assert identity assurance. There are many. So the REFED's assurance framework has its way of doing it. In the government, we follow the National Institute of Standard and Technology's 863-3 standard, which talks about identity assurance levels 1, 2, and 3. Kantara has its, etc. And they don't all line up. And they don't all necessarily mean exactly the same thing. So one thing we as a community have in front of us over the course of the next year is, given that there is not one thing that all of these things agree on that says, if you do this, then it means that. It's part of what we're trying to get to is an agreement on what are the processes that can reflect a level of identity assurance that a federal system or set of systems like NIH runs, that is the minimum for accessing information that we have. And I will point to this one here. I don't know if my cursor is moving. Nope, I don't see it. The IAL2 one in the NIST 863 column. That one really is going to be the most common one that I think you'll see federal agencies look for, because what that represents is some identity assurance. It doesn't have to be actually the in-person identity assurance, but there is some level of identity assurance that the IDP has and is able to assert. And most of the systems that we run are not top secret. They're not national security like systems. Those are the ones that need that higher level of identity assurance, the IAL3, which includes that the minimum for that is the in-person ID proofing. So I think what you're going to see is this IAL2 level, which in the yellow that's reflected here, high confidence in the asserted identity's accuracy. That's part of what we need to try and collectively figure out. What have you in the Federation, our Federation partners done within your onboarding processes, your ID proofing processes, that you're able to link something that allows you as an IDP in response to the signal that we send to assert with high confidence the accuracy of the identity that you are asserting, so that we can grant access to systems here at the NIH that are could apply to other federal agencies as well, because we all have this 863 standard that we're trying to align to. That's where we're trying to fit. So I'm almost done with slides and then we can talk. So the last piece then about becoming phase 2 compliant, and I blew past it there when I introduced this, but it's repeated again here by December 2022. And this is a made up date. What we're trying to do is give you time to adjust processes, but also buy ourselves some time. It does require on behalf of NIH that different NIH systems have to do some risk acceptance and file some documentation with the various authorizing officials that we have that for the different systems that we run, where we say eyes wide open, understanding the risk that for the next year, we will allow these federated authentications to come in where the identity assurance that's being asserted might not be at this IAL2 level that the security categorization of the system demands. But we recognize that the benefits, if you will, of this federated access, including the MFA that comes with it, that fills a niche, fills a gap, and that the MFA piece can in some respects be considered a compensating control, and over and above, well, what's the alternative? Somebody using a Google account, for example, where we've done no identity proofing, it's effectively an anonymous account, and there's no MFA that we're doing with it. So anyway, the first 2 pieces that are in this are done. This was what we just did in phase 1. The IDPs accept the NIH signal and turn around and send us back the MFA, do the MFA and send us back the MFA assertion. So it's really this green box that represents the focus of this next phase. And so consider it what is that, a year and a couple months to try and get there. We have built, similar to what we did for, I also blew past this, there was a hyperlink on one of the previous slides that represented an ERA compliance check. That didn't actually include this identity assurance piece. So there is a tool that we've built that allows you as an IDP owner to confirm when you come to the site and you select your institution, number 1, can you receive and interpret the signal that we send? And number 2, when you do your MFA and send us the response, are you sending the basic information that we're looking for, the MFA assertion, and in this case, the identity assurance or the identity assertion that we are looking for and need. So that represents a tool that we've built for folks to leverage to get compliant. Again, over time, at this note here at the bottom that the systems here at the NIH and across other agencies are moving, we're at different paces, we're implementing these requirements that, well, I have to do MFA and I need this IAL2 identity assurance. And the login.gov is has arisen as this credential of last resort for some systems, that if those federated partners aren't able to fulfill the need, well, I got to do it. So I'm going to send people over to GSA and make the different folks get a login.gov credential. So that's kind of the fallback in the event that IDPs aren't able to accommodate this. And the last slide I have then is links to a whole bunch of information. So over on the reading right to left, we've got a bunch of NIH websites that talk about different things that we've done in relative to announcements that we've made and authentications that we've done. Back over on the left, this wiki was one that Albert Wu, I think, wrote in its entirety practically. It's got a ton of great information for all of you for how to, what we're doing and when and how to become compliant. The ones in the middle, you've probably, many of you on the call probably had a hand in writing some of those. One I will point to is this InCommon Assured Access Working Group, which is a group that's been meeting for a couple months now, perhaps as much as the last year, as well as the MFA group. I think this Assured Access group, though, is trying to sort out what some of those standards are that you as research institutions can do to tie your existing onboarding processes to your IDP so that you can assert these identities, the identity assurance that we're looking for. And there was one thing that I wanted to remember to say, and I forgot, but it might come to me in the question time. So that's it for slides. Open discussion, any questions? And here I'll reintroduce my colleague Sumitananda, who's our technical lead. Sandeep had a family thing. He was going to be late. I'm not sure if he's going to be on or not, but hopefully he's been able to join and can chime in if need be. But any questions? And I see there's some in the chat, it looks like.
I think so far those are just some informative links that Brett and
Yep.
Albert were adding.
Let's see, E-Verify and I-9 map to low assurance, but NIH will require high assurance. Right, so if you, I'll make an allegation here, and Sumit and those of you who've read it, Tom I think has, Chris might have, can keep me honest. IAL2 implies remote identity proofing has been done. So it doesn't require that in-person identity proofing has been done. So the if you will, from our perspective, that middle identity assurance level, the IAL2 one, is the one that says that the data that somebody has, if you're doing it remotely, the data that they've typed into your web form, you've thrown it against Experian or some other authoritative source to validate that at some level of likelihood, only that person would know that information as collected and validated.
Hey, sir.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Kyle Lewis. I'm actually working down within NIAD. I'm the source of the spectrum slide, but if I can help you out with that question, because I had to do the analysis on that.
Oh, cool. Thank you, Kyle.
Yes, sir. So the question from Jim Basney was the difference between E-Verify and I-9 mapping to low assurance. And the reason for that is if you look at the documents required for E-Verify and I-9 of what is required to be accepted, there is at least one combination of documents that does not require a photo ID. So from a risk acceptance perspective, from the service provider's perspective, you cannot guarantee if all someone's done is that they would achieve a higher IAP level. As far as IAL2, Mr. Erickson's exactly correct. It's based on the data that's stored in that system, and we had to go through the same process for our system because we have an IAL2 level requirement, and we had to pitch to our own authorizing official in NIAD, Mr. Tartakovsky, of why we should accept IAP high as the equivalent of IAL2. The IAP medium and low didn't quite meet the threshold. If anyone's interested in more on that story, I've pitched for an ACAMP session to walk through that spectrum process later in this week. Thank you.
So Kyle, you might actually be able to help answer this next question. No plans for RAF high. So the way that this chart presents this, RAF high maps to IAL2. Which implies that, says that we do have plans for RAF high. That's exactly what our target will be. That there isn't currently in the REFEDS Assurance Framework 1.0, there isn't an RAF IAP very high, something above that, right? That maps to our IAL3, which implies the in-person ID proofing.
Yes, sir. That's correct. One of the curveballs that we ran into when we did the analysis is, a lot of these systems were 3-tiered systems, a low, medium, and high in each system, but not every medium mapped to medium. As you can see, even on the IDAS, the European standards, RAF high maps to the middle of the European standards, and you never actually get up to IDAS high. So to get back to what you said, sir, it all depends on the data that's in the system. And since we're mostly talking about research systems, many of those will require IAL2, which would map to IAP high.
Yep. And to try and answer Martin's question about PubMed. So PubMed, just as this chart shows a spectrum of identity assurance levels, I'm sure all of you also have systems that form a spectrum, a range of risk, right? Some are open access, some at the other end are absolutely not open access, right? So that this whole discussion about identity assurance and higher levels of identity assurance, higher levels of authentication assurance, the MFA piece, those really are at that end of the spectrum where that the risk is higher and that higher identity assurance and authentication assurance exists. PubMed is at, I'll call the lower end of the spectrum. PubMed is public information. The login for PubMed in many respects is for convenience. It isn't as a security tool. You don't have to have an account to be able to go to PubMed and do searches. The reason that people have accounts as often as not is so that they're in their PubMed profile, they're able to save searches or things that they come back and do time and again. So for example, of me here on my home computer, if I were to go and try and log into PubMed, one day I might want to search for one thing. I'm not a researcher. I'm going to come back the next day and I'm wondering what I can find about this. But as often as not, the researchers who are using PubMed, they're coming back time and time and time again, looking for what's the latest, what are the latest publications in my field, in my space. And that's where that profile really, really serves. So in fact, PubMed's requirement for identity assurance is IAL1. They actually don't have a requirement that they know who you are. They don't even have a requirement for MFA, right? So part of what the service that we run here at the NIH does is we are something of a proxy where there are myriad systems, many hundreds of systems that we front and provide single sign-on among those systems. Some of them are like PubMed. We front PubMed. It has this IAL1. There's a corresponding AAL1 for the authentication assurance level, which reflects username and password. So that's on one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum might be controlled access research data sets, which are at the IAL2, AAL2, or the highway end of the spectrum. And ERA actually is in the middle. ERA wants MFA, so they're at the AAL2, the authentication assurance level 2 represents MFA. But for ERA, they're also an IAL1 identity assurance level. So part of what we do is that you can think of, you've heard of step-up authentication. Well, imagine step-up identity, where as you transit among these various systems which have these different requirements, you may have started by logging into PubMed, and in which case, whatever got you in. I mean, you could have provided a username and password from what we ask the institution to do in that case could be RAF IAP low and username and password is fine, come on in. But if that person then immediately tries to jump over to some controlled access data set, not only do we need to do step-up authentication and have that person do MFA, but we also need the IDP, or will need in the future, we'll need the IDP to increase their claim of the identity assurance of the individual. So hopefully that answers that question. So where does local enterprise assurance fit? Can I defer to, yeah, thank you, Martin. Can I defer to somebody who's been on that working group and talking about this stuff? Because I know that they've been debating where local enterprise fits in. I'll let somebody else talk before I have something I'd throw in, but
yeah, I can add in some of the recommendations that we've decided to come up with in terms of the order of implementation for institutions. Local enterprise is not represented on this spectrum diagram because it doesn't directly align with these various levels. There's no way to kind of equate what my local enterprise and my how confident I have and trustworthiness of those identities to access my own internal critical systems. That can vary between various institutions, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have value. So I think an easy step forward for folks is to begin understanding where identity proofing occurs within your organizations, understand both the proofing aspect of that, as well as your credential binding. So how the identity is actually bound to the credential, and just begin to understand where that happens within your organization. And the recommendations that we've put forth from the Assured Access Working Group was to focus first on local enterprise, because your institution obviously already understands the security and accepts the risk of those internal identities to access your own internal systems, such as your the system where you would log in, an employee would log in to direct where their paycheck is dispersed. You already accept the risk of that. So that should be, that's basically an example of what local enterprise would mean for an identity that is within your own institution. So the recommendation was to explore local enterprise first, because you could easily obtain that level and assert that claim level for a large user base at your institution. In addition, if you proof them and you handle the credentials in the same way for that one person that is accessing those internal critical systems, and you follow all those same processes for very large roles within your institution, you could easily encompass all of your active students or active employees with that local enterprise level. And then we recommended moving on to what we see here within the assurance spectrum of low, then medium, and then high, and working to pursue those. The document that we have that I think Albert provided a link to, the DOI for that, contains a lot more in-depth information around what local enterprise can mean to you. And I think we're still interested in figuring out how service providers would see the value of that. I think there's a lot of value in it. And I don't know if there's others here that want to weigh in on the local enterprise. So far, we don't know that we've got many service providers that are specifically asking for it, but I think there's a lot of value in it. And I would like to see more service providers taking the same steps as the NIH to actually begin asking for identity assurance and looking at it from both what value could local enterprise bring you, and also what value do these higher levels get you?
If I could piggyback on what Brett was saying there, that for us, we view local enterprise as a step in climbing, or a rung in the ladder. For us, it's like a risk mitigation tactic, if you will, that while understanding that it will take time to tie, for many of you, maybe you've already done it for all I know, but for other institutions, it may take time for you to tie that ID proofing process to your credential. Local enterprise, as Brett said, could be something trivial to say, oh yeah, well, I see that these things only exist, or this grouper authorization, for example, represents that I know who those people are. All of those people, I'm going to assign them the local enterprise attribute, because I know that we vetted them enough. We, for my institution, have accepted a risk of what it is that I'm giving them access to. For us, that is a step above. You have no idea who they are. It doesn't get all the way to, I know exactly who they are, or I've got a higher assurance of who they are, but it's a step forward. And to the extent that it fits into this larger set of capabilities that we're talking about leveraging here, it's the same channel. And this was the thing I was going to say that I forgot to say, is that from our side, you never say you're done, but for all intents and purposes, we're done. We've put in place what we were going to put in place on September 15th. That thing that signals something, that for all intents and purposes, that's done. If you can accept that signal, then we're not gonna, in June next year, we're not gonna come back and say, okay, now we have to signal something different. And the same goes with what it is that you're sending back. In other words, over time, on your own schedules, if you can, as you both first start with what it is that we're signaling now with the ERA compliance checker and say, yeah, that works, I'm good there. And then as you do that work of the, I think it was, oops, this stuff of tying all of these things together, it's the same channel. And that goes to that other, the NIH compliance checker that will be your indication that you're done, right? And then all we're doing at the end of 2022 is starting, the messaging starts to be that if you don't do this by this time, then you're welcome to go get a login.gov credential, right? But over the course of the next year, you can come online anytime in that period. And we at on our team who built the compliance checker, we're here to work with you because we want to. This is good for us too. We want you to be successful because your success is our success. And at the end of the day, going back to that mission statement that I started with, we're about research, and the researchers work in your institutions. Those are the people we're trying to facilitate access for according to these standards that we are obliged to comply with. So I think there are many, many wins to be had, and we're looking forward to continuing to collaborate with you on being successful here. And I don't know if we go right up to 2 or if there's a hard stop, Bill. If I just noticed my clock says it's 1:46.
Yeah, we can go right to 2 o'clock.
Okay. I don't want to, I'm not going to pull the plug. Where?
Jeff, could I ask a question
Of course.
about, in many ways, in my mind, I see the service that you've built as providing a menu of security options to the backend systems or services that are many within the National Institutes of Health. Do you have any of those specifically that are interested in some of these specific levels of the assurance framework?
So I can offer one that is like on the cusp, or that will be at that higher level. We call it the Researcher Auth, AUTH service, RAS. And it's really, in some respects, it's a bolt-on to the NIH login service that we run that gives access to PubMed and ERA, among many other systems. But RAS, in many respects, fronts controlled access research data that is hosted by a number of different consortia that have gathered the research data that was collected over the course of a series of grants, for example. And so there are petabytes and petabytes, for example, of genomic sequences that might be about people with lung cancer, just for example. And then researchers for another grant, they might say, my research is to analyze that data that you guys are storing, hosting over in this place. And they file their research brief with an access committee that reviews what it is that they say they're going to do, gives them approval and says, yes, you are authorized to access these studies, right? And so I don't know if, I just saw her name in the paper again the other day, a woman named Henrietta Lacks. If you are familiar with her or Google that name, there was that's in the back of people's minds here at the NIH of wanting to make sure that those data, those genomic sequences belong to people. And those people signed a consent form that said, you can use my sequence for this and not that. And so NIH is very, very risk averse when it comes to exposing that sequential information to people who are not authorized. And that's why with RAS as the front end to do the authentications and package up the authorizations that allow people to connect to and do and access those genomic sequences, that we want to know not only that the person did MFA, but we want to know who that, we need that higher level of identity assurance that whoever it is, whether it was login.gov and their process for ID proofing or your institutions, that we know that you know who that person is, so that we can evaluate that claim and say, this meets the minimum bar needed to connect to that genomic sequence. So RAS is actually one that is, I mean, out of the gate, for all intents and purposes, you should not have access to RAS unless you are at IAL2 and AAL2. That's the type of data that is hosted or that it's fronting, right? But rather than tell 300,000 plus researchers to all go to login.gov and get login.gov credentials, the RAS may be a case in point for local enterprise, right? That at least to start, that the committee, the security committee that evaluates the systems that are granting access to RAS might say, well, yeah, let's allow federated authentication, but only if we're getting the local enterprise claim and only if we're also getting the MFA. So the MFA piece we've done, we've solved that. So it would be really that local enterprises. And I'm not saying this decision has been made yet, it hasn't, but that's the sort of thing, at least could facilitate access. Again, we're in the business of promoting research. It could facilitate access while the rest of these, the construction of the other processes to get to these higher level identity assurances are being built, with the understanding that a day is coming when somebody will say that the only way to get into RAS is if the authentication assurance is at level 2, that is MFA, and if the identity assurance is at a minimum of level 2. And whether that comes from you as our federated IDP partners, or we send somebody to login.gov, one way or the other, that will be the only way to get in. And so that's one example that is like real and present. They are chomping at the bit for this sort of access. Did that answer the question, Brett? I hope.
Yeah, it did. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Well, let's see. Well, I still have the floor and a second. I do want to repeat and say again, my sincere and profound thanks to Albert and Tom in particular. I mean, no joke, we could not have done this without their help. And Anne's contributions as well. There were a number of people in the InCommon team, but seriously, it truly was a collaborative effort, and it's one of those things that makes you proud to be a member of an organization like this, and we are. So thank you and to all of you, but thanks specifically to Albert and Tom. They were great.
Well, thank you, Jeff. That was a great presentation, a great discussion, and I think it really helped everybody's understanding of what and why is happening there.
Yeah, thank you all.